Welcome to the Mitchell Center. I'm David Hart. We have this wonderful lineup of talks and 8 students who are going to be giving short talks, and then I'm going to kind of keep an eye on the time. All the students know that with 1 minute left, I will hold this up. This isn't just a message to say you're a very special person, you're the one, but also that you have 1 minute left, and then my phone is set to bark at the speakers at exactly 5 minutes, and then we got this little 60-second handoff, right? And at the end of it, I'm delighted to say my colleague Linda Silka, a senior fellow here, is going to do a much better job than I would of kind of getting you all up here and interacting in a conversation with the audience. And I've seen this happen before, especially under her skilled leadership, and it's pretty fun. So with that, I think I will just get started. And the first talk is by Brady Davis, Cheesemaking in Maine, Investigating Network Connections and Sustainability. And note that there's also a talk coming up next Monday by a speaker that they're working with.
All right, well, thank you very much for the help there. I'd like to start off by taking a moment to say how grateful I am that I was able to spend my summer researching cheese. I'd like to specifically thank the Mitchell Center and the Honors College for supporting my research interests. And in particular, I'd like to thank Dr. Stephanie Welcomer for inviting me to join in on her project to research Maine's artisanal cheesemaking sector. While our study has many dimensions and is ongoing, in my 5 minutes today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the growth of Maine's cheesemaking sector and focus specifically on some of the networks that we have identified in the sector itself. So this is a very exciting time to be engaged in research in Maine's food system. Our state is one of the few in the nation where the number of small farmers and local producers is growing, and a part of this rise has been in artisanal cheesemaking. The number of small-scale cheesemakers in Maine places the sector as one of, if not the largest in the nation. And a survey into Maine's small dairy industry shows that much of this growth has come in the last decade. In the regulatory environment surrounding small-scale cheese production, a strong and supportive community of cheesemakers and many market opportunities are 3 of the reasons for this growth. These trends suggest that Maine has a regional cheesemaking cluster, which is a geographic network characterized by high interactivity that can promote economic growth, community development, and more efficient waste management systems. So our research was guided by literature that suggested increased network connections can lead to positive outcomes in factors of business and in environmental and social sustainability. Our study looked at the patterns of interactions of cheesemakers and their knowledge sharing, their marketing and distribution, and input and output networks. This slide shows the network questions we asked in our interview to prompt the cheesemakers to consider the individuals and the entities that they interact with in their operations. Our second question was aimed at investigating the gaps in networks that cheesemakers discussed, and this was an important question to show how this sector can be supported in the future. So after transcribing the interviews, we landed on a few themes for the specific networks that individual cheesemakers are linked into for various aspects of their business. These are markets, so where do they sell their products, their market info, how they configure their product mix, and who they go to see which markets will be best suited for them. Their milk sources, so this is where they buy in their milk, or if they're a farmstead, what sort of animals that they have in their cheese making. This is also grain and where they get their cheese cultures. Infrastructure is how they set up their cheese making operation and the technology and the maintenance of that technology. Business is their growth strategies, how they manage the financial aspects of their business, and also for some cheesemakers, their exit strategies. And then cheesemaking is cheesemaking knowledge and skill development. So using a program called UCINet, we were able to aggregate the connections of individual cheesemakers and produce this visualization for the pattern of interactions for what all 30 cheesemakers we interviewed looked like. These lines in this image demonstrate a tie between cheesemakers and the individual entities that they communicate with in their various networks. So we were also able to visualize each of the specific network slices that we categorized based on the responses to our network questions. This visualization represents the names and entities that individual cheesemakers mentioned as a source of their cheesemaking knowledge and skills, as well as continued sources of advice and consultation. Analyzing this network demonstrates that some entities and cheesemakers themselves are central in knowledge sharing and skill development. So where do we go from here in our research? As we continue to analyze these networks, we are looking to investigate how characteristics such as business model, life cycle, and scale impact connections for these cheesemakers. We are also looking into how different network configurations impact dimensions of sustainability. And if you'd like to learn more about Maine's artisanal cheesemaking sector, I highly recommend that you all attend next week's seminar by Jeff Roberts on Savoring Maine's Artisan Cheese, Opportunities, Challenges, and Prospects for Sustainability. Thank you.
In case you didn't realize that, he's also an undergraduate, so watch out. So the next talk is by Sarah Ebel, Nicole Ramberg-Pihl, and Michael Torre, Interdisciplinary Research to Address Socio-Ecological Uncertainty and Abrupt Ecological Change in Downeast, Maine.
So I can just use this and click on. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Ebel. This is Mike Torre, and our other research partner is not here today. But we are an interdisciplinary team that's funded through the IGERT Fellowship from the Climate Change Institute, and we're made up of an ecologist, a fisheries scientist, and an anthropologist, and we're looking at addressing socio-ecological uncertainty. So what's happening in the socio-ecological system, in part due to abrupt climate change in Downeast, Maine.
So our research is taking place within the context of a changing Gulf of Maine ecosystem, and it's been shown recently that an intense warming trend is occurring over large portions of the Northwest Atlantic. So this figure shows the warming trend over the past 30 years in the Gulf of Maine, and then by contrast, a much stronger warming trend over the past 10 years. And so a changing ecosystem will affect many species in the Gulf of Maine and also potentially fisheries that are vital to the economy of coastal Maine.
So coastal Maine is in a very precarious situation right now as the Gulf changes very rapidly. Maine's fisheries brought in almost $600 million in revenue to the state of Maine, and almost 460 of that is from the lobster fishery. So fishermen are very dependent upon, this is in 2014, very dependent upon the lobster fishery. It's slightly unfortunate because we have a single species management structure in Downeast, Maine, and that's combined. That means licenses are individual species. So you get a lobster license, you get a sea urchin license. And that's been combined with limited entry licensing in Maine. As the Gulf has changed and we've fished, we've limited entry. So there's no new entry into most of Maine's fisheries now. You can't access them. And this constrains fishers' decision-making and behavior and their abilities to adapt. So in 2010, the National Ocean Policy called for a shift from the single species structure to ecosystem-based management, which looks at the interactions within an ecosystem. And they're looking at doing a pilot program in Downeast, Maine. So that's NOAA and Penobscot East Resource Center and several groups down east.
So we broke down our overall goal of aiding ecosystem-based management in Maine into these three objectives. And the first one is to delineate ecological boundaries in the Gulf of Maine to support this.
Our second objective is to gather fishermen's observations and perceptions using nautical charts to basically map them, and we're going to overlay that with GIS with Objective 1. And then our Objective 3 is looking at the different types of licenses, portfolios of licenses that fishermen hold, and that comes from Josh Stoll's work, who was, I believe, a Mitchell Center Fellow here. And we're looking at what types of licenses they have influence their adaptive strategies as the Gulf changes, and they're constrained by single species structure.
So ecosystem-based management policies support structuring basic units of management along ecological gradients, as opposed to more traditional political ones that you'd find in a single licensing structure setup. And so to look at this, part of our research is to delineate ecological boundaries. And a preliminary portion of this work is using multivariate statistics to visualize change in multi-species structure. And so this is one kind of technique, and it uses this it's non-metric multidimensional scaling and this color gradient. And so you can see kind of the main point here is there's an onshore-offshore gradient. And then the next part is this heat map, which looks at change in multi-species structure relative to geographic distance. And so basically using these kind of two techniques, you kind of start to get an idea of where boundaries might be placed, and we're further developing more sophisticated techniques to hone in on it more.
So for this, from the social side, to understand adaptation to abrupt climate change or climate change in general, we have to understand how resource users act, not only in an ecosystem, but under a political structure. So fishers in Downeast, Maine are acting underneath a single species management structure. And for now, we have to understand what kind of opportunities do they see in order to adapt or change their livelihoods. And I would focus on Downeast, Maine because of the pilot program, but also they're very resource dependent with fisheries, reef making, and blueberries, and they have very little opportunities. So how does the political structure constrain or facilitate their behavior? And our hypothesis is that single species management is coupled with limited entry makes them vulnerable to abrupt climate change. How we're doing that is through semi-structured interviews, looking at adaptation opportunities and charting ecological observations. And then we're using a survey using multi-criteria decision analysis, which is a quantitative way of understanding decision making, and we're correlating that with their license portfolios. So what licenses do they hold and how many?
Sorry, my dog is. Oh, I know what I gotta do. Very well. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you guys. Great. Okay, so the next talk is by Daniel Mistro, Window Inserts and Communities Adopting Them. Just a quick thing to say that one of the fascinating things about this is, even though many times these topics are very different, it's pretty cool to see connections, see methods or theories or just real-world solutions that they might have in common or where we might get some hybrid zones.
So like you said, my name's Dan Mistro. I'm going to be talking about window inserts and the communities adopting them, which is a project I've been working on in collaboration with Dr. Sharon Klein. So I wanted to take a step back and talk about what sustainable energy projects actually are to us. So in order to be a sustainable energy project, it has to be economically sustainable, meaning it saves money or is cost effective. Socially sustainable, meaning people actually want to use it, don't mind having it in their homes, etc. Technically sustainable, meaning it works with our available equipment and infrastructure, and environmentally sustainable. It doesn't contribute to climate change or any sort of environmental detriment. So with that in mind, I'm going to be talking about a problem of heat loss through the windows. So as you can see from this thermal image of a normal house, there's quite a lot of heat loss through the windows. All those red areas is heat escaping your homes, which you would rather have inside, so you don't have to pay more money to keep heating it. We estimate about 30% of heat loss through the home is through the windows themselves. So I've been working with Window Dressers, which is a nonprofit corporation down in Rockland, Maine, who has this project that they've launched about 16 communities in Maine, where they have volunteers find customers out in the community and volunteers to actually build these inserts. So with that and buying all their materials in bulk, they're allowed to sell these inserts for about 10 times cheaper than a commercially available insert that's comparable in quality. And in fact, 25% of the customers they serve can actually pay a lot less than that, about $1 per insert for up to 10 inserts. That way they can get the people who need these inserts the most, them in their homes. So the window insert looks like this. So it's a pine frame that's been custom measured to fit right into a customer's window around both sides, so it creates two areas of dead space. So one at the insert and one between the inner layer of the insert and the window. So these areas of dead airspace actually increase the insulation of the home, so you can save on your heating bills. It's also weather stripped along the outside, so that seemingly fits airtight, so you don't feel as much of a draft in your home either. So I'm not going to go through this slide too in depth, but we've been using this heat loss formula you see at the top, which I'm happy to explain to anyone afterwards. But for now, I included this other image to show that we are a little bit uncertain about what these values actually are. So with that in mind, we ran a Monte Carlo analysis, and we can say with 90% certainty this saves somewhere between 18 to 88 gallons of heating oil for the average customer, and has a payback period of less than a year to 11 years, depending on these uncertain elements. But we do know it can save up to 27% on each customer's heating bill. We also surveyed all the people that have been participating in these projects. So we sent the survey out to approximately 600 people. We got about 120 responses back, and they all came in overwhelmingly positive, especially with the satisfaction with the overall project experience. You can see 99% of people were very satisfied or satisfied with how the project actually worked out, and most of them would also recommend the project to a friend. So we are pretty confident to say that this is a sustainable energy project according to our definition, because we can see it's going to save people money. We see people don't mind it in their homes because it looks seemingly in their windows. It works in pretty much any window as long as it has 7/8 of an inch of space for it to fit in, and it can save on heating fuel, which actually contributes to climate change. So our ongoing work is we just did another one of these window insert builds in Bangor that just finished up about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to be sending out more surveys to these people trying to get more feedback. But I'm actually going to be going through their heating bills to try to verify what our model shows that it's going to save money and try to figure out how much exactly it actually does. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
So the next talk is by Kaci Fitzgibbon, engaging citizen scientists to evaluate potential for water quality decline in Maine lakes. Good. Do you not know where the little thing is? Yeah, you're getting
that one. Oh, my bad. Okay, thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. My project is a joint project with the University of Southern Maine. So we have 2 pieces to this puzzle, and we are working on the physical sciences and the social sciences. So understanding lake vulnerability in terms of eutrophication and declining water quality is important in this changing environment. We hypothesize that sediment chemistry, lake morphology, and percent agriculture are the controls behind phosphorus and therefore lake water quality. In 2015, we studied 24 lakes covering a wide range of trophic status, and in 2016 we added 18 more lakes so that we could study chain lakes. Water samples were collected in June and August and analyzed for a suite of elements with a focus on phosphorus. And from our results, we've been able to construct a lake water quality model, and this is just one piece of that puzzle. For help sampling, we contacted the DEP and the VLMP. So like I said before, we are getting help from the University of Southern Maine and to focus on the social sciences. So they have set out to survey and identify factors that affect successful collaboration among the monitors and the lake associations. Their goal has been to develop a blueprint to positively influence stewardship behavior among the public. And the lake association that we have collaborated most with has been the VLMP. They are a citizen scientist organization that uses and teaches volunteers to collect water quality data. Using the volunteers in this way has allowed the VLMP to amass data at a rate 10 times greater than the DEP is capable of. And this project wouldn't be possible without the help of our amazing volunteers, so now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on them. So the surveys that UMS received back, received back was based on the volunteers' personal lives. It showed that the volunteers are primarily over 50, they're highly educated, and they're pretty high earners. And overall, the impression I formed upon meeting all of them and sampling with them was that they had a really great excitement and love for their lakes. There was a vast range in how long they'd been sampling. A few had just completed the monitoring, and some had been sampling for upwards of 20 years on the same lake. What remained intact through all of this was their sense of dedication and care that they bestowed upon their lakes. And from talking to them and hearing their stories, I got a sense through our interactions that they were very excited that the university and the state were so interested in the work that they have produced. They have a lot of pride in their lakes and the work they've conducted, as they should. And a lot of them are hopeful that we will be able to continue monitoring alongside them. And then the work with the volunteers is focused on conducting extensive samples, as you can see here. This is just a list of some of them. So the task I set myself upon with entering this program was to contact and schedule a meeting with each volunteer. Their task was to provide transportation around the lake. be that through motorboat, canoe, or even occasionally kayak. The kayaking trips were logistically the most interesting. The volunteers underestimated how much gear I would be bringing, and I tended to underestimate how hard this was going to be to get to such a big lake. But fortunately, the waves stayed manageable on these few occasions, and no gear was lost to the seas. My favorite interaction from this summer that sort of expresses the concern and care seen for these lakes happened this summer. After monitoring a lake, a volunteer requested I stay to look at the water transparency readings he'd been recording through the past 10 years. We realized that trends were showing that this was the worst transparency readings he'd seen this year. And he asked what could explain this, or if other lakes were feeling these same trends. It was when he asked this question that I realized I'd been hearing these exact same things from other volunteers. This year seemed to be either the worst or the best possible transparency readings. And just getting that aha moment was kind of really important and helpful, and that kind of anecdotal evidence is really priceless for our study. Thank you.
Good job, Kaci. So this next talk is by Lydia Horne. The title is Risk Perceptions of Climate Change Amongst Tourists and Tourism Stakeholders. I just discovered that about a month ago she was talking about this work in Sardinia, Italy. So I'm pretty upset, but I'll settle down, I'm sure, later.
Thank you. I would recommend going if you ever have the chance. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the support of my advisor, Dr. Sandra de Arias de Stone, and the support of my committee members, Dr. John Daigle and Dr. Caroline Novelet, in this ongoing research. As you can see from the title, I'm interested in climate change risk perceptions, and I'm going to start by relating that to today's topic of sustainability. So in our research, we're looking at how risk perceptions influence mitigation and adaptation behaviors in the face of climate change. To have a resilient socio-ecological system, you need both mitigation and adaptation. Furthermore, for long-term sustainability, that's dependent on resiliency. So an overarching goal of our research project is to facilitate the long-term sustainability of both the environment and the study area communities with which we're working. We're looking at the tourism industry. Tourism is one of Maine's most important industries. 18 million people visited the state last year. It generated a lot of revenue and a lot of state employment. Of those 18 million tourists, 35% identified as nature-based tourists. As the name implies, these tourists are incredibly reliant on the natural environment, which makes this market segment very vulnerable to changes in climate. Some of the changes in climate that we're seeing and expecting to see continue in Maine include warming temperatures, shorter winter seasons and longer summer seasons, increased rain, decreases in snowfall, and more frequent and unpredictable extreme weather events. I think you can see from just this short list of impacts how that might impact the nature-based tourism industry, especially in areas that are reliant on winter nature-based tourism. So when I say climate change risk perceptions, what do I mean and why are they important? You can see from this definition they're views that are specifically directed towards making sense of climate change as an external threat or hazard. Risk perceptions are important because people usually respond to a hazard in ways that are consistent with their risk perceptions. So we've got a model here of several different factors influencing risk perceptions. And then the theory behind this model is that people then adopt behaviors that are consistent with their risk perceptions. In this case, we're looking at mitigation and adaptation behaviors. As I mentioned before, the winter nature-based tourism industry is especially vulnerable to climate change. Because of that, we've decided to focus on Western Maine in the Maine Lakes and Mountains tourism region. As you can see from the bottom statistic, over half of visitors to the area identify as nature-based tourists. This is also the only tourism region in Maine that experiences higher tourism during the winter months than during the summer months. Our research objectives seek to understand how stakeholders perceive their risk to climate change, what factors are shaping those perceptions, and then how, if at all, are these perceptions shaping the adoption of mitigation and/or adaptation strategies. And we're doing this by interviewing stakeholders. I spent a lot of time driving back and forth between here and Western Maine. I've talked to 20 individuals so far. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about nature-based tourism, business owners and operators, nonprofits whose mission supports tourism in the region, as well as town level all the way up to regional level management and planning officials. So I'm going to wrap up not by discussing any results because research is ongoing and time is very short, but I just wanted to reiterate the significance of the research that we're doing. Tourism planning and development is very much an ongoing process in Western Maine, and we hope that by facilitating several participatory town hall style meetings with stakeholders, that we can help them inform that planning and management. We also hope to identify barriers and facilitators to mitigation and adaptation strategies, as well as helping stakeholders take advantage of the potential emerging opportunities resulting from climate change. And then, as previously stated, our overarching goal is to increase the long-term sustainability of both the environment and the communities within Western Maine. Thank you.
Great job. So the next presentation is by Sonja Birthisel. The title is A Decision Aid to Improve the Economic Sustainability of Maine Organic Farms Through Improved Weed Management.
All right. Let me see if I can find the expand button.
There you go.
Oh, wrong one. There we go. All right. So my name is Sonja. I'm a PhD student in Ecology and Environmental Sciences in the School of Food and Agriculture. And I'm going to talk to you today about agricultural weeds. This is my friend Mark Guzzi. He farms at Piecemeal Farm in Dixmont. And for him and other organic farmers in the state of Maine, weeds are a major production challenge. Here, Mark has done a brilliant job weeding, painstakingly hand-weeding his carrot crop, and he is going to get a beautiful crop. But in between those rows of carrots, there are an awful lot of hairy Gallenstoga weeds, which are one of our most pernicious weed issues on organic farms here in the state of Maine. And those weeds are probably going to set seed and contribute to Mark's seed bank, which is the store of weed seeds in his soil. So weed seed banks can vary a lot from farm to farm and even from field to field, and both in terms of the number of weeds and the species that are there. And if a farmer wants to try to reduce their seed bank and the weed pressure they experience over time, it can really help to think about maximizing debits, if we're taking this bank metaphor to its logical extension, and minimizing credits or seed inputs to that system. Now, conventional growers have a great way to do this in the form of herbicide, which you can think of as kind of one giant hammer that you can swing and eliminate a whole bunch of weeds and therefore reduce seed bank inputs very effectively. But if you're an organic grower, you really need to think more in terms of many little hammers. So for example, harrowing or flaming or hand weeding seedlings. Or if you have larger weeds, using a more aggressive tool to try to preempt seed rain by getting those out of the system. Or using practices that encourage seed predation and decay, or encourage germination so that seedling weeds can then be cleared. Do I need to say anything else about that? Nope. All right, so that brings us to this project, which is trying to utilize existing data sets about what we know about the effectiveness of these many little hammers of ecological or organic weed management and use them to create a simulation model that could then underpin a decision aid, and this is really the crux of it, that will allow farmers to visualize what impact their farm management rotations might have on their weed pressure. And then also we hope this will be able to drive our future research efforts in productive directions. So this is a concept art for the decision aid I hope to build, and I think it's very exciting. A user might be able to select their starting seed bank, sort of from low to high,
and then use kind of a drag and drop interface to be able to build a management rotation that they might use. So for example, here under the management blob, I've built a rotation where I'm tilling and then flaming to create what's called a stale seed bed, planting a short season crop like for example lettuce, and then once that's harvested I might till that in and plant a second crop of carrots or another short season crop and then apply a natural mulch. And what this decision aid would do is sort of run a model under the hood and then simulate based on what weed the farmer was most interested in controlling, what their seed bank and the weeds present on their farm might look like over the course of that season. And this could be used iteratively. So the farmer could then say, okay, well, what if I don't flame? What does that do? Or what if I add a hand weeding event in mid-June? So we think this could be a really fun way to do what farmers have done for centuries, which is learn through trial and error and through experience virtually online. Hooray! So underpinning this model is a discrete time simulation model in R. And so far I've got the math figured out and I have it kind of behaving sensibly. The graph there is showing the seeds in the top 2 centimeters of soil being influenced by tillage events, but unfortunately I can't tell you all about the math in 5 minutes, and instead I'm just going to remind you that what this is doing is really simulating that sort of mini little hammers approach that organic farmers know and love in order to help them visualize decision making on their farms. So, thank you so much! And I'd like to thank the Mitchell Center for funding this project and my advisor Eric Gallant and my other collaborators.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next one is Emma Fox, Latent Attitudes, a reliable metric for capturing attitudes about water quality and a comparison with engaged stakeholders.
Okay. So, like David said, my name is Emma Fox. I'm a student in the Ecology and Environmental Science program in the School of Economics. And I'm going to be talking about latent attitudes as a reliable metric for capturing citizen attitudes about water quality.
That's me.
In comparison with engaged stakeholders. It was a fast 5 minutes. So this work is part of the greater New England Sustainability Consortium Safe Beaches and Shellfish Project. The aim of which was to improve the science behind coastal management decisions. This research speaks to that overall goal. If you take away nothing else from this in the next 5 minutes, I hope that you'll learn that we've found a reliable metric for capturing those attitudes through a proxy we're calling latent attitudes, and that boundary organizations or organizations of engaged stakeholders are in a really good position to address some of those latent attitudes. The scope of this study was the Maine and New Hampshire coast with selected sites in selected reference sites as in Frenchman Bay, and our engaged stakeholder group is the Frenchman Bay Partners located in Frenchman Bay. The partners are a group of stakeholders interested in an ecologically, economically, and socially sustainable future for the Bay, and they get together to talk about shared conservation goals that they have. The Frenchman Bay Partners function as a boundary organization. What are boundaries and why do we care about boundary organizations? Boundaries are the barriers that sometimes crop up between different groups over contentious issues when these groups have differing worldviews. And boundary organizations perform a facilitating, mediating, or translating role across those boundaries between groups to try and help build common ground or even maintain those boundaries sometimes. So just to motivate this research a little bit further, Maine and New Hampshire's coastal water quality is economically valuable. I think we all know and have heard today about the value of the commercial marine fisheries and the value of coastal tourism. So we think that human behavior on the shore is important to think about when considering trying to improve management decisions because human behavior impacts the quality of coastal water.
Our data come from the 2015 Nest, Maine and New Hampshire Coastal Resident Pilot Survey. We had a sample size of a little over 500. And the 2015 Frenchman Bay Partner Survey, which had a sample size of a little less than 40. Our theoretical framework draws from the behavioral economics and behavioral psychology literature, which tells us that unobservable attitudes impact people's behavior on the coast. Attitudes have cognitive, affective, and behavioral components. Cognition is kind of like how you think about the world. Affect is sort of like your perception about the world, and behavior is how you act. We're trying to get at these latent attitudes as a means to proxy those attitudes, which the literature tells us are unobservable. So latent attitudes, again, are representative of a deeper or underlying worldview. So to identify those latent attitudes, we performed an exploratory factor analysis. We looked at a group of questions from the survey that had similar content, and we took the variables from those questions and performed a statistical test to see if they loaded into a single factor or multiple factors. We took those that loaded into a single factor and lumped them into latent attitudinal composite variables. We performed a Cronbach's correlation alpha test to see, do these hang together well? Is there good internal reliability for these variables? And the variables that scored a 0.6 or higher, that's a generally accepted cutoff of okay, this is good. We kept personal responsibility and polluted runoff. Personal responsibility is a variable that gets at people's sense that they, as an individual, have an impact on water quality, whether positive or negative. Polluted runoff gets at people's sense that pollution or contamination, is a real driver for poor water quality. So, if you take away anything, again, we have some unobservable attitudes that impact behavior, and we've come up with a reliable metric for capturing some of those attitudes in our latent attitude proxies. Engaged stakeholders. I forgot to tell you. So we performed this both with our engaged stakeholder group and our coastwide citizen group. And so we had some shared attitudes between these two groups. So that's how we know they're reliable. Our boundary organizations are made up of engaged stakeholders, right? And so because of some of their shared attitudes, they're in a good position to address some of the latent attitudes that citizens have about water quality. Boundary organizations, because of some of the work they do in that bridging between different groups with sometimes conflicting worldviews. Whoops. All right. Okay. Because of the work that they do in sort of bridging over some of the barriers and the deeper work that they do with water quality monitoring, are in a good position to help communicate with coastal citizens about water quality and trying to bridge that attitude and behavior gap. Thank you.
Emma just defended this, and if you didn't get to hear enough, which I didn't, I actually have it as a podcast that I'm going to listen to on the way home, okay, so you can get the rest of it in. I just want to point out that it's literally true that the dog's bark is worse than its bite. So the last talk is by Bree Berry, Reuse and Social Capital.
All right. Hi, everyone. Last but not least, so my name is Bree Berry, and I'm a first-year PhD student here in the Anthropology and Environmental Policy program. And I'm also a research assistant on the Mitchell Center Materials Management Research Group project. And I want to talk to you a little bit about something that I'm just starting to investigate. So unlike everyone else, I don't have anything to tell you about what I found, just what I'm trying to figure out. But what I'm looking into is reuse and social capital. And just in case the dog barks before I'm done, here's what I think. I think that participating in the reuse economy builds social capital. But what do I mean by reuse? Has anyone, with a raise of hands, has anyone bought or sold anything used in the last year? Oh, yeah. That's why I love reuse. We can all connect to it. Reuse is a really broad field. So it can be anything from this take-it shop at a transfer station to this really nice-looking thrift store in Portland. reuse can be exchanged for money, for free. You can swap goods for other goods. It's a really broad field. What I'm trying to keep out of my definition is the sharing economy. So if you think of things like Uber and Airbnb, these are the exchange of services or really large objects like dwelling units, and is a temporary exchange. So I'm really looking at the exchange of used consumer goods. And the reason why I'm really interested in this is because there's a lot of evidence that is showing that the levels of consumption that we have is in the United States and in other high-income countries is unsustainable. So this is a quote from the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, and it says that we need to find happiness with lower levels of consumption. And we already have a lot out there in the system. We've never consumed or produced more than we are right now today. And right now, all that excess material is going into the waste stream. So it's going to landfills or incinerators. And with reuse, we have the opportunity to instead send those materials to someone else that needs them or that wants them. So we can really satisfy our desires, our desire to consume with objects that are already out there in existence, which I think is really exciting. There's also some scholars who are suggesting that reuse might have other benefits as well, some social benefits. And one way that I'm thinking about looking at this is through social capital theory, which is basically just the idea that social networks have value. It's a really hairy theory, and it's really hard to pin down. There's a lot of different scholars that are contributing to these ideas, and they don't really find a lot of consensus. And it's notoriously difficult to measure. Oh, so why would I choose this? Doesn't make any sense. There's some really strong benefits associated with social capital, though. Cleaner and safer communities, more effective economies and governments, and improved educational outcomes. So there's a lot of things that we can see that come from social capital. So if we can find a way to measure it, it would be great. And policymakers would have a lot of incentive to pursue reuse, especially if we can link those two things together. And luckily, there are some policy-oriented folks who are starting to measure social capital. So in 2013, the OECD came out with this report that takes a lot of these scholarly theories, takes a lot of these ideas, and mashes them all together, and comes up with these 4 different aspects of social capital. And they say that any one of these might be able to indicate social capital, but if you can measure all of them together, then you've really got something. So I'll just take you through a couple of them and show you how we might start to connect reuse and social capital together. So if we think of trust and cooperative norms as one of those 4 aspects, one way that they're looking at that is by generalized reciprocity. So the idea that if I give you something, you don't necessarily have to give me something back. And I'm sure we've all seen a free box at a garage sale, right? That's a free gift. They're not expecting anything in return. So these are spaces where the goal maybe isn't profit, but is instead something else. So we can sort of see the idea that we might be building some social capital. We can also look at personal relationships. Scholars are studying really free markets, which is a type of free market. And participants were drawn more to the building of relationships than they were to the goods themselves, and that's what they found. So there's plenty to study here, which is great because I've got a lot of time left. But some of the things that I'm interested in looking at are there some forms of reuse that are more effective at building social capital than others, especially when we think about internet-mediated exchanges like Craigslist or Uncle Henry's? And is there a feedback loop where communities with high social capital actually foster more reuse? So that's all I've got for you.
Good job.